Welcome to Team Building Cultures, the podcast designed to deliver tools and tips for improving team communication, collaboration, and fostering a culture where teams thrive. Now, here's your host, Beverly Hathorn, owner of Strategic HR Consultants.
Hello, listeners, and thank you so much for joining another episode of Team Building Cultures. Today, I am very excited to speak with Mr. Jay Williams. Jay and I have had a previous conversation, and I find him to be extremely enlightening and uplifting. Jay is an expert in creating alignment among leaders and executives to help them gain clarity of values and strategic movement and goals and priorities. And he's really a wonderful person to speak with. So thank you so much for joining us. And let's get started, Jay. I'm excited to have you here.
So am I. I feel a lot of pressure to live up to your introduction now.
Oh, you know what? I didn't even touch the surface of what I gleaned from you as a person when we spoke before. So let's just get right into it. You know, I see that you're going to help us to understand the difference between a conversation and confrontation. So that is an area that we were just chatting about that I struggle in. When I'm attempting to gain clarity, I might sound a bit confrontational. So help us understand. Let's just talk about that concept, and then we'll delve a little deeper into that.
Yeah, the reason I wrote about this in the book and had a chapter dedicated to conversation versus confrontation was, in my experience, people didn't have the skills and the confidence to have a conversation. And a lot of people are confrontation adverse. And so what happens is they didn't feel comfortable having a conversation. They're confrontation adverse. So no communication occurred. And I think you can relate to that. And then so people, we talked about this movement of quiet quitters. I think people emotionally quietly quit, and they quit and stay. And I think what would help facilitate and minimize that, because, companies looking at attrition and attraction right now, is being able to have conversations, these open, honest, on-time points that we're exchanging are, what we think and what we feel and what we know. And so how do we have it in a conversational format? And to your point, I want to know a little bit more about, you said, I feel a little bit confrontational sometimes when I don't understand something. That you tell me a little bit more about that, because I think that's a great jumping off point, is that usually confrontation occurs when there's a differencing of perspectives or someone doesn't understand.
Yes. So for me, I get into a position when I am approaching a situation, or let's say, I want to obtain your buy-in, and you don't want to buy in, but you give me some sort of fluff across the top, and I know that there's something deeper there. That's not the reason you don't want to do it. Tell me the real reason you don't want to do this. And because the reason you just gave me doesn't make sense. And when I was raising the kids, and they would, maybe say, oh, this happened, and I would say, that's not what really happened. I don't know what really happened, but I know it's not what you just told me, so I am, that's kind of like my basis. And in my personal relationships, like I said, when I'm trying to gain your buy-in, or I'm just inquiring about something and you're not being fully transparent and fully upfront with me, then I appear confrontational, because the reasons that you give me, I toss them back and say, well, but, why would that be an issue? Because and, I tend to ask more questions that put may put the other person in an uncomfortable position, because remember, they're trying to keep something from me and I continue to dig to get it. So so yeah, how can you help me with that, Jay?
You'd be a great police detective. You'd be great with, and the reason I say that is it almost sounds like an interrogation, right?
Yes.
Yes. So I think for anybody listening is that whether it's personally or in business, there's times that we have preconceived beliefs. And so
Mhm.
one of the things, if you're taking notes, is do we ask questions to be um, accusatory or inquisitive? And if you're starting off, that's the first thing. I love that you're asking questions, by the way. And so that's a great place to start. And the reason that it is that if you're asking questions in the right type of questions, one that are inquisitive versus accusatory. So as an example, if you said to someone, well, why are you late?
Mhm.
The accusatory tone. And even if you go down to the neuroscience of it, why questions put people on the defensive? Why were you late? Why didn't you get your reports on time? Why didn't you make your numbers? It immediately puts them into the state of defending and explaining. If your question
Okay.
is what is the alternative, is to ask a what question. So as an example, I said, if you ask someone, why are you late? What you could replace it with is what would need to happen so that you're on time going forward? What needs to happen so that you can commit and deliver on having these reports in on time? What would need to happen so that you hit your numbers? And what's happening is that not only do why questions put you on the defensive, they take you back in time and are problem focused.
Oh, that's interesting. So
Versus, oh, go ahead,
they take you back in time to
the
whatever
problem.
the problem. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so say as an example, and this is low hanging fruit, and I think if you have another example you want to ask about, you can. Is quite often we'll ask them, well, why were you late? And so they go back in time and they go, wow, last night I fell asleep and I woke up, my phone was dead, and then I had to charge my phone. And you're like, oh my God, I don't care. That's not really what I just want to know why you weren't to work on time today. And so what happens is that they go back in time and now they focus on the problem. When you ask someone a what question, it's a future-based question and it's solution-based. So if you said, what needs to happen so that you're on time going forward, they would say, you know what, I probably need to have a secondary clock set up so that if my phone dies. And that's where the brain goes. It answers the question that you ask. So for those folks who are listening, if you want to have a conversation and you don't want to be off to a flying stop, don't ask a why question. Just don't ask a what question. The other suggestion I would give you if you're looking at those questions is if you're lacking understanding of a situation, you don't understand why they can't get the reports in on time, you don't understand why they would say that in a meeting when you had a clear conversation that we were going to hold that conversation as a sidebar, you could ask them, what was your perspective on what happened at the meeting? And the reason that you're doing that is that the most effective communicators, and this is about effective communication, are communicators that communicate from the other person's perspective. You can't do it until you first understand it. So even with your kids, you alluded to, is you're like, what was your perception of our conversation earlier? Like, what was your takeaway as far as what the priorities were or what the time frame was around what I asked you? And again, you can hear from my voice, you need to be very careful because the inflection could dramatically change how someone perceives it. So you could ask them, what was your perception of what happened with the client? I want to get, how you interpreted the situation. So that's the first thing, is to get their perspective. And as human beings, we want to defend and explain anyway. So it gives them an opportunity to do that. In an effort to drive the conversation and to be more curious, you can expand their thinking around this conversation by asking, what do you think the perspective was of the client, the other people at the meeting? What do you think my perspective was when I heard the situation? And by the way, I use words like situation because they're very neutral, not when I
Mhm.
heard what the problem was, when I heard what the conflict, because inherently, I think one of the biggest challenges with communicating is that we use judgment instantly. And so it limits the possibilities of the outcome. The way that the brain works, subconsciously will find data to support what we believe. So the most effective communicators actually suspend that judgment and that belief in that moment to allow for some yet undiscovered information. And I will tell you firsthand, I'm like every other human being, right? I mean, there's times I have preconceived ideas of what happened because I know what I saw, I know what I heard. And by asking their perspective and gaining their thinking, what they know, what they think, and what they feel, more often than not, I've gained additional information. At worst, I've gotten some confirmation of what I already believe. And so let me pause there. Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what you heard from that.
That is such awesome information, especially when you talk about trying to gain their perspective, use neutral words to try to put them in a better position to have the conversation. Because when you ask these why questions, you're right. You do take them back to the problem. And now, especially if that problem was very frustrating for them or whatever, now they're re-dipped in that ocean. And once again, they're frustrated. So I can see how that would happen. And unfortunately, I'm guilty of that because that's how I ask a question. Why? That's that's where I go, So I've got to work on maybe my preconceived notions because I don't always know, like I said, I don't always know what you're not being transparent about, but I know what you just told me is not it. So I tend to want to know what's really going on. And fortunately, this happens more in my personal life than it does in my business environment. But I do kind of have this sixth sense. I don't know if it's mommyism or intuition or I don't know what it is, but I do kind of know when you're not being 100% honest with me, especially like you say, I know what I know and I know what I saw already. So, and it doesn't line up with what you just told me. So I will work on that definitely. Understanding to go to future based questions and solution based questions. What do we need to do to ensure that this does not happen again? Instead of me needing to know specifically why it happened. And maybe if I ask those future based questions, I'll understand why it happened.
Yes, as you're speaking, I think you need to be clear on your goal. And so, from a business perspective, and even personally, I believe that we're more interested in the solution versus the problem. However, the
Mhm.
question we ask takes us to the problem. Now, for anybody who is a psychologist or a therapist, or you could be a scientist, why is relevant when you're trying to diagnose the problem? It makes sense to you?
Mhm.
However, if we're at work and I don't need to diagnose why the reports aren't in on time, especially when you gave me your word that you're going to have them. So I don't need to know that, you grew up in a situation where time was very loose or, as long as it was within 24 those hours, I don't need to know that. I just need to know what needs to happen so that we don't have this conversation again. So that's where I differentiate. So if you are a scientist, a therapist, you are diagnosing, that's where why could be highly relevant. More often than not, in a business setting or even personally, why is not relevant, especially if again, low hanging fruit, but you talked about personal situation. Do you need to know why your kid didn't make their bed? How often do we say, well, why didn't you make your bed? Really? Who
Mm-hmm.
cares?
Mm-hmm.
Who,
Mm-hmm.
who cares? All I want to know is what needs to happen so that your bed's made before you leave for school every day. Do you see the difference between the two
Yes.
conversations? And so your
Mm-hmm.
frustration does grow. When you put somebody on the defensive, the emotional brain hijacks the rational brain, and all it knows is life or death. So now the person's in the corner defending, right? And they're blocking punches because they feel as though they're attacked. And the reality is it's not a life and death. However, the brain treats it that way. What you're experiencing, by the way, when you say it's not the real reason, is people often use the excuse for the reason. So if you said to someone, why were you late? And they go, well, I got stuck in traffic and there was a red light there. And that's the excuse. The
Mm-hmm.
reason is that you didn't allow enough time. You come that way every day. You have for the last 10 years or so. You know that the traffic patterns fluctuate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So somebody didn't get me the information on time. That's the excuse, especially if you've been working with that person. They have a pattern of doing that. The reason is that you didn't take the precautions. You didn't give them the necessary time frames that allowed you some margin of error there. And so I share that with you because even in your personal life, we have a tendency to reflect on the excuses versus the reasons. And so there is something intuitively, I think, that you're experiencing. One of the things I encourage people to do is take what you're thinking and get it from inside your head to outside. So you said something that, if you said to me, Jay, what I'm seeing and then what I heard don't match up for me in my mind. And so if you could help me connect the dots, that would help
Mm-hmm.
move the momentum of the conversation. It's okay to say that. Again, your tonality plays a large part. So if you go, what you're saying and what you're doing don't match up, it's a little hypocritical, that's going to land a little bit differently. And so again, it's okay. And what I want to do is to remove this from your brain, because what happens is we have a tendency to let it sit there. And so now we're moving around it, over it, under it, and we're not interrogating reality. And the reality is that, Jay, I need some help here because what I'm seeing and what you're saying is not matching up for me. So if you see this perplexed look on my face, help me out. Tell me a little bit more about that so that I can better understand.
Yeah. And I definitely, what I'm thinking usually shows up on my face. So when you've not given me everything that I need, you're gonna see it on my face. So I don't know that people probably respond negatively to not only um, me pushing them in the corner with my why questions, but also my facial expressions. So I'm getting this image of me that's not I'm getting this image of me like pushing you into the corner and just telling you, give me the truth. I want the
It's an interrogation. It's an
yes, it's an interrogation. Yes, yes. I probably unknowingly do that very often, but now that I've had this chat with you, I can definitely do better. So let's flip the script here and go to the person that's being interrogated, quote
Yes.
unquote. Let's flip the script and go to that person. How can that person better respond to people like maybe like myself, or situations where they're being hit with those why questions? How can they better respond to those situations?
Yeah, I want to answer that question. I'm going to go back just a little bit. For anyone who's listening, the quickest way to affect change will be the change in you. And so disproportionately with our conversation, I'm going to focus on that. And so one of the things that you said before is that you can see my emotions on my face. And I'm guilty of that as well. And about 3 weeks ago, I was working with a company, and there's a good sized group. There's about 6 or 7 people that were in their 20s. And for anybody who's listening, if you're not in your 20s, you're the generation after, or maybe the one after that, or maybe the one after that.
Mhm.
We kind of grew up differently, right? When you get to work, it's showtime. Whatever's going on in your personal life, you leave at home. And so they went on to educate me, and they told me that our generation doesn't work that way.
Hmm.
In our generation, we feel as though full transparency is important. And so if we're having a bad day, that's not something we'd hold back from our peers or we'd hold back from our clients. And so Beverly, I know the look on my face I was speechless. This is where it's important your emotional intelligence comes in, is I was self-aware of what was going on my face. And I told them, I said, guys, listen, don't go by my facial expression, go by my words. I'm going to ask you questions and I want to understand, because this is not congruent with the way I grew up. So this is new information. Don't go by my face, because my face was, oh my God, what are you thinking? I couldn't process. I wasn't connecting dots because it contradicted 100%. So as we went on, they even shared more things, this generation, that we want to have relationships and that's reciprocated with the client, and that they owe us as well a certain level of transparency. Yes, I had the same look you did, Beverly. That being said, I wasn't there to judge, I was there to help. And that's why I ask questions, to continue to understand and to getting their perspective. And so I just want to share with you, I do this for a living and I fall prey to that as well. Your emotional intelligence, which we can talk about if you want to, being self-aware and then self-regulating, is where you begin to really excel. And that heavily influences how people respond to you. It's the law of reciprocity, is that the way that I treat you more often than not is the way that you'll treat me. If you're treating me as though you don't understand, you don't care to understand, and you're going to defend and explain, guess what I'm going to do? I'm not going to care about your perspective. I'm going to defend and explain. I'm going to try to communicate my perspective. So I'll pause there. If there's anything you want to say, and then I'll get into for those other people who feel, so what do I do when people attack me? So let me pause there. Tell me what you're thinking.
Okay, well, I'm thinking it's very interesting what you said about the generation who says they want complete transparency and they want to talk about things that are on their mind, or things that just happen to them, or maybe this is, you won't believe what happened to me on the way to work today, da 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 da. And I just think that that's interesting, because you're right. I am from the generation that when I get to work, I'm at work. When I'm home, I don't bring work home, and I don't bring home to work. And whatever happens in the middle, I deal with as best I can. I try not to bring, when I'm frustrated from work, when I was in the corporate environment and I was frustrated or upset, I try to leave that at the work door and not even take that into traffic with me, because traffic has its own set of frustrations and disappointments. So
Especially
if
if you
I
live in Atlanta.
yeah, especially in Atlanta. And if I brought all that, if I loaded that up in the passenger seat with me, work there, then by the time I get home, I'm going to explode at the first little thing I see. Somebody left a shoe at the door. Oh my God, it's gonna be horrible. So so I've always tried not to do that. And it's interesting that there is a generation of people that can handle all that luggage, that can deal with all that baggage. But I guess the way that they deal with it is to release it, out into the atmosphere to someone or someone, that they've built a work relationship with. And I guess that's a good thing. And I think on occasion I've been privy, I've done that type of thing. But I really like what you said about the quickest way to affect change is to change you. So that is an awesome concept that I think I'll probably, I don't know, put on a poster or a banner or, something on my wall so that I can remember that, because that's simplistic, you know, however, something that we probably overlook all the time. So yeah,
I don't want to take credit
great.
for that. I think Gandhi may have said that. So just,
Probably.
yeah. So it's, as we talk, it's not the knowledge, it's the applied knowledge, right? Because
Mhm.
everybody knows that the quickest way to affect change is with myself. It's just, are you doing that? And
Are you doing it?
are
Yeah.
you changing? And I think our ability to, I don't want to say change, I think the ability to evolve and grow and to consider a perspective other than your own. And that's where confrontation generally comes in, is your ability to at least consider or factor in a perspective other than your own. When I get back, just to get back to this group, as we were talking, I said, tell me more, because they said, I'm interested. Disregard my face. Don't go by that. I am interested. They said, the generations before us, including yours, they were inauthentic and that they suppressed their emotions. And so they did not share what was going on. In our generation, it's about being authentic and transparent. And again, I needed to evolve and to grow. The only way I was going to do that was if I could hold a perspective other than my own, or at least entertain it. And that's how you can avoid confrontation, is going in with this, just this curiosity. Help me understand. No judgment, right? As soon as I thought that their response was wrong, it drove me in a different direction. And I had to dial myself back, because I found out, I saw what I was doing. It wasn't to understand. And in that understanding, we found some common ground and we had this conversation. I think we avoided confrontation. Someone asked me, they said, well, I think confrontation is good. I've heard that it is good. They said, how do you rationalize that in what you say? I think conflict is good. Having a conflicting perspective is great. Whether it comes from my kids or whether it comes at work or it comes, my social group or at church, confrontation is how you respond to it. And that's where I differentiate. I was working with a group last week, and it was a CEO and one of the partners of the company. And it was after a meeting, they're sitting there and they're discussing something, and they're defending and explaining, defending and explaining, defending and explaining. It's like watching a tennis match. And they said, how's this going for you, Jay? I said, not well, but I'm just here watching. How's it going for you guys? They go, oh, we enjoy this banter. I said, I want to ask you a question observationally, because you asked me to be here for this reason. With what you guys were just doing, if you reflect, was your goal to understand the other person's perspective or to be understood? Because Beverly, they're going back and forth. Well, you said this and I said this, but this is what I believe, and that's. And they just paused and they said, my goal is to have that person understand me. I said, what was your goal? To have them understand me. I said, do you see the difference when your thinking is to have it drives a different behavior. If your thinking is to be understood, you're going to do all the talking.
Mm-hmm.
If your thinking is, I want to understand, then you're going to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm integrating some other things like cognitive behavioral therapy, where you focus on the thinking versus the behavior there. So I don't want to go off in too many tangents. Again, it all gets back to, how are you evolving? How are you adjusting your behavior to get a different response? And there's the old cliche, if you do the same thing you've always done, right, you're going to get the same results you always have. So what's the alternative to that? Is what can I do differently to yield a different result, a different direction, or a conversation, a different response? And asking questions that are inquisitive versus accusatory. We ask questions out of courtesy too sometimes. Like, how many times you go, oh, how was your weekend? You don't care. You're not really, really interested, right? Curiosity is a little different, is that I know you went on a picnic with the family this weekend, or you went to the Atlanta Braves game this weekend, what was the highlight of the game?
Mm-hmm.
Different, right? One's a little bit more curious. So I want to be careful not to go off in too many tangents. You had mentioned something about the emotions, and if I can just bounce around a little bit for people who are listening, is that it's okay to have the emotions. I don't want the takeaway to be is that we have to ignore them or compartmentalize them. It's just, you gave the analogy of riding home, is that, is this problem riding the car or driving the car? That's a little different. If you're riding in the back seat or in the passenger seat is different than if you're driving. And so with your emotions, just to be aware of that, are they driving the car? Are they just the passenger in the car? And then how does this impact me socially? How does it impact my family? How does it impact my coworkers? Because, the thing is that when you're 100% authentic and 100% transparent, you're going to share a lot of things. And that could be weighty information. What if the receiver's like, I'm not in a place to take this, or you're weighing me down? I'm sure you have friends that you're like, stop. I can't take any more bad news or negativity. And so that's where the emotional intelligence comes in. If I could segue a little bit, is that it's about being able to identify an emotion in yourself and others, and then adjust your behavior accordingly. You need to be self-aware, self-regulate, socially aware, and then relationship management. And so for the listeners, I want you to know you can have the emotions. There's a responsibility that comes along with that. There's an outcome, there's consequences. So just be aware of that when you check one box, you may be unchecking another one.
Interesting. Yeah, when you go to the I'll just call it the man in the mirror concept, about, so when you become self-aware and self-regulating, hopefully that will allow you to strengthen your relationships and get you to a better place, because some of us, like me, I'm full of questions. I just got so many questions, and they're usually to understand, because I'm thinking about the situation, and in my mind, all these alternatives and different routes are coming up, so my questions are to put me on a straight and narrow, because I'm going, well, what if you do that? What if this happens? And if we do that, what if that happens? And how do you handle this? And how do you handle that? So, my questions are usually to get me to the point where I'm clear, but I once again, I have to admit, I can be sort of interrogating. I will definitely admit that. I'm happy to be self-aware.
You can
about that.
preface your questions, by the way. So there is a methodology of prefacing your questions. So Beverly, in your case, you say, listen, Jay, it's going to feel like an interrogation. That's not my intention. I'm just trying to get some clarity, or I'm trying to fill in the blanks, or I'm trying to paint a picture for myself. By prefacing it, it helps the other person to connect the dots. Otherwise, they're left to their own device to determine why you're. Have you ever had someone ask you a question? You're like, why are you asking me that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's what prefacing, like, so here's the reason. I was working with this travel agency around their strategy. And one of the questions that they ask at their qualifying process is, how much money did you budget for this? And they said they get pushback all the time. People don't want to share it. They said, what do you think is going on? They go, well, if I tell them $7,500 for a week, they think they're going to get a $7,500 package, right? Coincidentally, it's exactly what I budgeted. And as I was talking with the travel agents, I said, well, tell me what your thinking is. They said, well, I just want to get a point of reference. But the reality is, Jay, if I can come in at 4,200, 4,500, they're going to like me even more. So I want to see where they want to be at, and can I beat that for them? And so as we talked, I shared this methodology of prefacing it. So when you ask people, what is your budget? And tell them, just to give you a little background of why I ask, is I just want to see where your comfort level is, and tell them, know this, I want repeat business from you. So my goal is, to the best of my ability, is to get you the best pricing without compromising your experience. And so now that I mentioned that to you, if I have to choose between saving money and a better experience, which would be more important to you, with the understanding that I need to fall within $5,000? So that's where prefacing comes in handy, is that you can help connect the dots for that person. So now they have a comfort level. Part of what they're giving you in the way of excuses and maybe reasons is they're trying to anticipate why you're asking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And hedge their bets that I don't get in trouble. I don't say the right thing. I say what you want me to say. And that's where
Mm-hmm.
prefacing can serve you well.
I see. Yeah, very well put. Because as the travel agent said to you, I don't respond well to that question. Particularly car dealers, car salesmen will ask you that.
I was
You know,
thinking
why?
that exact same thing.
Well, how much do you want to spend? I'm not going to tell you that, because you're going to get me right there when
Yeah.
they'll particularly ask you, how much do you want to pay per month, for the vehicle. And, if I tell you $500, you're going to squeeze me into something $500 a month, but it might take me 10 years to pay it off. So, I don't respond well to that. I get very defensive about that question, and I will not answer it. I'll just say, well, we'll talk about that later, or, that's for me to know and you to find out, or something like that.
Wow. Okay. There you go. There's Beverly, for me to know, for you to
Find out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So imagine, for someone listening, with that car salesperson, if they asked you, as it relates to pricing, what's the most important thing to you? Your
Mhm.
total price, your monthly price, what the financing, what the interest rate is, the term, that. And when I work with organizations, because the psychology of what I do has universal applicability, it's about communication. So I work with organizations around sales. That's the question I would ask before I ask, how much do you want to pay a month? And we went with my son to buy a car. And the way I work is, I did all the research. I know what the value of the car is. I know what I want to pay for the car.
Mhm.
And so, when I went there, I was very specific. And he said, well, what do you want your monthly payment to be? And I said, please don't go there with me. I know what I want to pay for the car, and I know what my
Mhm.
son wants. And so what happens is, there could be a breach in trust there, because you don't trust the person's intentions. By prefacing, you can build trust around the person understanding your intentions.
Awesome. Yeah, because if you were my salesman asking me, well, what's more important to you, the term or the total price, you would get all that information. So maybe you should be a salesman.
I'm
You would
not,
get
I think we're all selling something, Beverly. We're all selling. Well, the reality is that there's a trust that's built, because now you're trying to understand. If I said, I'm here to help you and to get you the best deal, now what you said, what I see and what I hear are congruent, and your brain's looking for that information to vet that data. And can I trust this person? And listen, the response could be different. Someone could come back and they go, to be honest with you, I don't care what my monthly payment is because my company's going to pay that. Right.
Mhm.
They may
Mhm.
be transparent with you. They go, as long as you don't go over $750 a month, I really don't care. What's most important to me is that I get a car that has tinted windows and has 22-inch tires. So whatever you can fit into that. Now that information becomes useful to you. And what I want to do with everything I do is this: I want to create shorter, more productive, more energizing conversations. That's my whole goal. And that's why with the what question, we can get right to the solution. It can be shorter, more productive, and more energizing. How
Mhm.
frustrating has it been when you ask someone why? Now you're 45 minutes in, you're no further along. You don't understand, and you haven't addressed the solution yet.
Awesome. Awesome. I have learned so much from you today.
Oh,
I've taken a lot of great notes. So, from the top, let's make sure that our questions are inquisitive and not accusatory, because then we put people on the defense. And ask a what question, and maybe instead of a why question, unless, of course, you're trying to diagnose a problem, but ask a what question, because that leads to solutions, as opposed to having the listener revisit the trauma
yes.
that they just went through, and because what questions are future based, and make sure that we try to ask our questions from the other person's perspective, and that kind of helps put us on a neutral playing field. And definitely, I like the fact about preferencing your questions, so that kind of builds a level of trust, because the way you just sold that car to me a minute ago, it sounded, it didn't sound salesy. I don't want to offend any salespeople or any
Yeah.
car salespeople, especially, but it didn't sound salesy. It sounded, I understood why you're asking me those questions, and I would respond. We could actually have a conversation around that. So, and then that the goal is to maybe promote shorter and more productive conversations, instead of this extensive back and forth. Well, why'd you do it that way? Well, why didn't you do this? Well, you should have did that, instead of it going like that. So this has been a great conversation for me, Jay, and a wonderful, I'm sure my listeners gleaned a lot from it. And I'm just really glad that you came to visit me today. So when my listeners decide that they want to reach out to you and learn more, how can they reach you?
The easiest way is they can go to the jwco.com. So
Okay.
the jwco.com. And if you want to go to the contact page, you can reach out. My commitment is I always respond within 24 hours. And I'm open to all conversations. And so I want to encourage you to do that. There's also, if you want to get to know me stylistically, there's a questions tab on there, and you can write in your question and I'll respond in a video response. I keep all names, all details confidential. However, in 60, 90 seconds, respond to what your question is. So I would love to invite people to do that as well.
You'll get a video response to your question. That's
Yes.
awesome. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's somewhat unique. I would say that's a differentiator.
I love to hear that, because everybody's trying to be different in the exact same way. And I'm
Yeah.
searching for ways to be a little bit different.
Well, that is definitely one. So, is there anything else you would like to leave us with today, Jay? Any last parting words or
Wow. Last
little
part.
tidbits?
I'm going to leave you with one thing. I don't know that it's related. However, I see it as a pinch point, and I'll try to articulate it quickly. Is that I think our definition of respect has been diluted over the last decade or so. And if you are out there, especially as you're interacting with people and having conversations, where I see there begin to be a disconnect, is if we don't respect the other person's thinking. So whether it's their political beliefs, whether they get vaccinated, their identity, their religious beliefs, we're no longer respectful. And I want to invite people to always be respectful, whether you respect the other person or not. And more often than not, when there's confrontation, I see that one of the people do not respect the other person, and subsequently have not become respectful. And that's where the disconnect occurs, is how can we be respectful even when we don't respect the other person, their perspective, their thinking, their choices.
Wow. Yeah, I think you're right. Respect has just kind of floated on off into never land, and it's not very often practiced anywhere. I mean, in the political scene, or on TV, or Yeah, it's just kind of floated on off. So
Yeah,
that's
if you don't
good.
respect the person, then you don't have to be respectful. And
Yeah.
the reason I say this to you is it's true what I just articulated. And there was data. There's a woman, Amy Cuddy, she wrote this book called Presence. And in the book, she had done research globally. And what she found was that human beings, regardless of where they're located in the world, seek out two things in every single interaction: trust and respect. And so, whether it's our political choices, can we trust and respect this person? Whether it's our business relationships, who we hire, who we do business with, whether it's in our family, trust and respect. And my experience has been is that when there's a disconnect and a confrontation, one of those two boxes has been unchecked.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
will leave you with that. I didn't want to go.
Mm.
It's like the preacher on Sunday, right? When they get done preaching, they come up with their final message. So I don't want to do that to you.
Very intense conversation, very eye-opening, informative, uplifting. So I do thank you so much for joining me today, Jay. This has been really great. And I will definitely try to practice some of the things that I've learned today. This is great.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure being on. Yes, great questions. You got my mind going. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Team Building Cultures. We hope we have delivered helpful and enlightening information to help you create your dream team. Join us next time